You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The first crack of the window pane sent my heart racing. The second made me realize this wasn't just the wind. By the third, I knew with sickening certainty that someone was trying to break in, and I was alone in a house miles from help. I never should have agreed to house sit for my aunt. Sure, her place was beautiful, a sprawling country home nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. But it was also isolated, the nearest neighbor a good mile down the winding dirt road. When she'd asked me to stay for a week while she was on vacation, I jumped at the chance for a quiet getaway. Now, as I heard the sound of shattering glass downstairs, I was regretting my decision with every fiber of my being. The day had started normally enough. I'd woken up late, enjoying the luxury of sleeping in without an alarm. I'd made myself a leisurely breakfast, then settled on the porch with a book, basking in the warm summer sun. As evening approached, I'd come inside and made dinner, then curled up on the couch to watch a movie. That's when I'd heard it, a soft thud from outside. I'd paused the movie, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then another thud, followed by the sound of footsteps on the porch. My first thought was that my aunt had come home early, but as I approached the front door, I saw a shadow move past the window. A figure much larger than my petite aunt. That's when the first crack of glass sent me scrambling back. Now, huddled in the upstairs guest room, I could hear them moving around downstairs. The heavy tread of boots on hardwood, the crash of something being knocked over. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, trying to dial 911. But as the call tried to connect, I remembered my aunt's words from when I'd arrived. Cell service is spotty out here. If you need to make a call, use the landline in the kitchen. The kitchen, where the intruders were now. I bit back a sob of frustration and fear. Think, I told myself. There has to be a way out of this. I looked around the room, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I unplugged it, gripping it tightly as I crept towards the door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from downstairs. I could hear them talking now, their voices low and gruff. "Check upstairs," one of them said. "Make sure we're alone." My heart leapt into my throat. I looked around frantically, spotting a linen closet at the end of the hall. Without thinking, I darted towards it, slipping inside just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Through a crack in the door, I watched as a man passed by. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed all in black. In his hand, he held a crowbar. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't check the closet. He moved from room to room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. I could hear him rifling through drawers, opening closets. He was getting closer. Just as I thought he was about to discover my hiding place, a shout came from downstairs. "Hey, I found something." The man turned and hurried back down the stairs. I let out a shaky breath, my legs trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall for support. I knew I couldn't stay in the closet forever. Sooner or later, they'd find me. I had to get out of the house. Clutching the lamp, I eased the closet door open. The hallway was empty. I crept towards the stairs, straining my ears for any sound of movement below. I could hear them in what sounded like my aunt's study. They were arguing about something, their voices rising in frustration. This was my chance. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wood. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they must be able to hear it. I made it to the bottom of the stairs and paused, listening. They were still in the study. The front door was just a few feet away. If I could make it there. I took a step forward, then another. The door was so close. Just a few more steps. Suddenly, A floorboard creaked loudly under my foot. The voices in the study stopped abruptly. "What was that?" one of them asked. Panic surged through me. I abandoned all attempts at stealth and ran for the door, yanking it open and bursting out into the cool night air. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the pounding of feet. I ran down the porch steps and across the lawn, heading for the woods that bordered the property. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged into the trees, but I didn't slow down. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, their angry shouts echoing in the darkness. I ran blindly, with no idea where I was going, driven only by the need to get away. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I pushed on. The sound of pursuit seemed to be getting fainter, or was that just my imagination? Just as I thought I might have lost them, my foot caught on a root. I went down hard, the lamp flying from my hand. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and winded. Then I heard it, voices. Closer now. They were coming. I struggled to my feet, looking around desperately for somewhere to hide. That's when I saw it. A large, hollow log a few feet away. Without hesitation, I dove into it, curling up as small as I could make myself. From my hiding place, I watched as flashlight beams swept across the forest floor. I could see their feet moving past, hear their angry muttering. Where'd she go? She can't have gotten far. Keep looking. I held my breath, pressing myself further into the log. Please don't let them find me. Minutes passed like hours. I could hear them moving around, searching. More than once, a beam of light passed over my hiding place, and I was sure I'd been discovered. But each time, they moved on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard one of them say, "Forget it. She's long gone. Let's get out of here before someone shows up." Their footsteps receded, and soon the forest was quiet once more. But I didn't move. I was too scared, too unsure if it was really over. I don't know how long I stayed in that log. Hours, probably. The sky was starting to lighten when I finally gathered the courage to crawl out. My whole body ached, and I was covered in dirt and scratches. But I was alive. Somehow, I'd survived. I made my way back to the house cautiously, half expecting the intruders to jump out at any moment. But the place was quiet. The front door stood open, and inside, I could see evidence of their search. Drawers pulled out, items strewn across the floor. With shaking hands, I picked up the landline and called the police. They arrived quickly, lights flashing and sirens blaring. I gave my statement in a daze, still not quite believing what had happened. The intruders were never caught. The police said they were probably just burglars, opportunists who'd thought the house was empty. But in my nightmares, I still see them chasing me through those dark woods, their angry shouts echoing in my ears. I didn't stay at my aunt's house after that. I couldn't. The place that had seemed so peaceful now felt tainted, unsafe. I went back to my small apartment in the city, finding comfort in the constant noise and presence of other people. But sometimes, late at night, when the city grows quiet and the shadows seem to lengthen, I find myself thinking about that night, about how close I came to, I don't even know what. And I wonder about those men. Who were they really? What were they looking for? I'll probably never know the answers. But one thing's for certain. I'll never house sit in a remote location again. Some peace and quiet just isn't worth the risk. The moment I saw his thumb jutting out from the side of the desolate highway, I knew I shouldn't stop. But as the lone figure grew larger in my rearview mirror, curiosity overrode my better judgment. Little did I know, this decision would plunge me into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the landscape broken only by the occasional tumbleweed or distant mountain range. My eyes were heavy, my back aching from too many hours behind the wheel. I was looking forward to reaching the next town, wherever that might be, and calling it a night. That's when I saw him. A solitary figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched, thumb raised in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. As I got closer, I could make out more details. He was a man, probably in his mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and clothes that had seen better days. A large backpack sat at his feet. Every instinct told me to keep driving. I'd heard all the stories about the dangers of picking up strangers, especially in the middle of nowhere. But something about the man's posture, the slump of his shoulders, made me hesitate. He looked defeated, desperate. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was slowing down, pulling onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of him. I watched in my side mirror as he jogged towards the car, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Thank you," he said as he opened the passenger door. "I didn't think anyone was going to stop." I nodded, trying to quell the unease in my stomach. "Where are you headed?" "Just as far as you're willing to take me," he replied, settling into the seat. "I'm Jim, by the way." "Alex," I said, pulling back onto the highway. "Nice to meet you, Jim." For the first hour or so, everything seemed fine. Jim was quiet but polite, answering my occasional questions with brief responses. He was from back east, he said, trying to make his way to California for a fresh start. I found myself relaxing, thinking maybe I'd been paranoid earlier. As night fell and the desert grew dark around us, Jim began to get more talkative. He asked about me, where I was from, where I was going. I gave him vague answers, still not entirely comfortable with sharing too much personal information. "You ever wonder what it would be like to just disappear?" Jim asked suddenly, his voice taking on a strange edge. "To leave everything behind and become someone else entirely?" I glanced at him, a chill running down my spine despite the warm night air. "Can't say I have," I replied cautiously. Jim chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I have. A lot. Lately." The conversation lulled after that, an uncomfortable silence filling the car. I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, my eyes flicking more frequently to the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty, stretching into darkness. "Mind if I change the radio station?" Jim asked after a while. "Go ahead," I said, grateful for the break in tension. As he leaned forward to fiddle with the dial, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Tucked into the waistband of his jeans, partially hidden by his shirt, was the unmistakable shape of a gun. My mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? Was he a criminal on the run? Was he planning to rob me, or worse? I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. "So, Jim, where exactly in California are you headed?" He turned to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. I thought I said I didn't have a specific destination. "Right. Sorry," I mumbled, cursing myself for the slip-up. I must have misheard. Jim was watching me now, his earlier friendliness replaced by something harder, more calculating. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, my heart pounding in my chest. "You seem nervous, Alex," he said, his voice low. "Everything okay?" I nodded, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. "Yeah, fine. Just tired, I guess. Been driving a long time." "Maybe we should pull over," Jim suggested. "Take a break." "No," I said quickly, then tried to recover. "I mean, I'm okay. There's a town coming up soon, I think. We can stop there." Jim didn't respond, but I could feel his eyes on me. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional static from the radio. I was trying to figure out what to do when I saw it. A sign for a rest stop, just a mile ahead. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Maybe I could find a way to get help, or at least get away from Jim. "I'm going to pull into this rest stop," I announced, trying to sound casual. "Need to use the restroom." Jim nodded slowly. "All right." I pulled into the rest stop, my mind whirling with half-formed plans. There were a few other cars parked there, which gave me a small measure of comfort. As soon as I stopped the car, I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle. "Alex," Jim said, his voice stopping me cold. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I turned to find the gun in his hand, pointed directly at me. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Jim, I said, my voice shaking, you don't have to do this, whatever you're running from. Shut up, he snapped. Start the car, we're leaving. Please, I begged. Just take the car. You don't need me. His laugh was cold, humorless. Oh, but I do. See, you're my insurance policy. As long as I have you, no one's going to look too closely at me. We're just two friends on a road trip, right? With trembling hands, I started the car. As we pulled out of the rest stop, I saw a family returning to their minivan. I wanted to scream, to honk the horn, to do something to get their attention, but the cold press of the gun against my ribs kept me silent. We drove through the night, Jim directing me onto smaller and smaller roads. I lost track of where we were, each mile taking us further from safety, further from any hope of rescue. As dawn began to break, Jim instructed me to pull onto a dirt road that led into the desert. We bumped along for what felt like hours, until finally, he told me to stop. End of the line, Alex, he said, gesturing for me to get out of the car. On shaky legs, I stepped out into the desert. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Jim walked me a short distance from the car, the gun never wavering. I'm sorry it had to be this way, he said, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. You seem like a good guy. Wrong place, wrong time, I guess. I closed my eyes, waiting for the shot that would end it all. But it never came. Instead, I heard the sound of retreating footsteps, then a car door slamming. I opened my eyes just in time to see my car disappearing in a cloud of dust. Jim was gone, leaving me stranded in the middle of the desert with nothing but the clothes on my back. It took 2 days for someone to find me. 2 days of scorching heat and freezing nights, of thirst and hunger and the very real fear that I would die out there. When a park ranger finally spotted me, I was delirious, sunburned, and on the verge of collapse. The police never found Jim or my car. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that many victims of similar crimes weren't so fortunate. But as I lay in the hospital, trying to make sense of what had happened, I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, betrayed by my own compassion. It's been years since that night, but I still see Jim's face in my dreams. I still feel the press of that gun against my ribs. And every time I see a hitchhiker on the side of the road, I feel a mixture of fear and guilt as I speed past, windows locked, eyes straight ahead. I learned a hard lesson in the desert that day. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones that look just like us, the ones that prey on our kindness, our empathy. And sometimes, the choice to help a stranger can lead us down a road from which there's no turning back. The first night in our new house, I heard footsteps when everyone else was asleep. The second night, I found a door that hadn't been there before. By the third night, I knew with chilling certainty that we weren't alone in this place, and whatever was sharing our home didn't want us here. We'd been so excited about the move. After years of cramped apartment living, Sarah and I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a house. It was an old Victorian, a bit rundown, but with good bones, as the realtor kept emphasizing. The price was surprisingly low for the neighborhood, but we didn't question our luck. We were too thrilled at the prospect of space for our growing family. Sarah was 5 months pregnant with our first child. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. The house creaked and groaned, but we chalked it up to its age. It's just settling, I'd tell Sarah when she mentioned hearing odd noises at night. I was so focused on getting everything ready for the baby that I barely noticed the strange cold spots in certain rooms or the way shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision. It was on the third night that things took a turn. I was up late, painting the nursery, when I heard it, clear, distinct footsteps coming from the floor above. But that was impossible. We didn't have an attic. and Sarah was sound asleep in our second-floor bedroom, heart pounding. I crept up the stairs, paint roller still in hand. The sound had stopped, but as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the wall across from our bedroom, was a door that I was certain hadn't been there that morning. I stood frozen, staring at it. It was old, the wood dark with age, with an ornate brass knob that seemed to gleam in the dim light. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back downstairs and pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity, that damned human trait, propelled me forward. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath and turned it slowly. The door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the silent house. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable. The beam of my phone's flashlight barely seemed to make a dent in it. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just that oppressive silence. I took a tentative step forward, then another. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The air felt thick, heavy with the musty smell of long disused spaces. Suddenly, my light fell on something that made my heart leap into my throat. A figure, standing motionless in the darkness. I stumbled back, a cry of terror caught in my throat. But it wasn't a person. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a mannequin, dressed in what looked like clothes from another century. Around it were piles of boxes and old furniture, all covered in a thick layer of dust. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. It was just an old storage space, probably sealed up years ago and forgotten. Nothing sinister, nothing supernatural, just an oddity in an old house. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye. A glint of metal nestled among the boxes. Curiosity got the better of me once again, and I moved closer to investigate. It was a locket, tarnished with age, but still beautiful. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was an inscription on the back, but it was too worn to make out. As I fumbled with the clasp, trying to open it, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, coming from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But there was nothing there. Just the open doorway, leading back to the familiar hallway of our home. That should have been my cue to leave, to slam that door shut and never look back. But I didn't. Instead, I pocketed the locket and continued exploring. The room was larger than I'd initially thought, stretching back into shadows my light couldn't penetrate. I moved deeper, past more mannequins and piles of antique furniture. The further I went, the colder it got, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. That's when I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Get out." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Get out." The whisper had become a roar, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I ran like I'd never run before, back through the maze of forgotten things, towards the door. But it wasn't there. Where the door had been was now just more wall, more darkness. Panic seized me. I pounded on the walls, screaming for help. But my cries seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. Just as despair was about to overwhelm me, my hand brushed against something. The doorknob. With a sob of relief, I turned it and burst through, slamming the door behind me. I stood there in the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart racing. Had that really happened? Or had I fallen asleep while painting and had some kind of vivid nightmare? But the weight of the locket in my pocket told me it had been real. All too real. I stumbled back to the bedroom, my mind reeling. Should I wake Sarah? Tell her what had happened? But how could I explain something I barely understood myself? In the end, exhaustion won out. I crawled into bed, telling myself I'd figure it out in the morning. But when morning came, the door was gone. The wall was smooth, unbroken, as if the events of the night had been nothing but a dream. Even the locket had vanished from my pocket. I tried to convince myself that's all it had been. A dream. A hallucination brought on by stress and paint fumes. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was in our house. Something that didn't want us here. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became our new normal. Items would move on their own. Doors would slam shut without warning. And always, there were the footsteps at night. Sarah noticed too. I'd catch her staring at the walls sometimes, a look of confusion and fear on her face. But we didn't talk about it. It was as if speaking about the strange events would make them more real, more dangerous. Then came the night I woke to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Panic gripped me as I searched the house, calling her name. I was about to call the police when I heard it. Her voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from behind that damned door that had reappeared in the hallway. I didn't hesitate this time. I flung the door open and plunged into the darkness beyond. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. John, help me!" Her voice sounded distant, frightened. I ran towards the sound, barely aware of my surroundings. Objects loomed out of the darkness, more mannequins, old furniture, things I couldn't even identify. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was finding Sarah. I found her in what looked like an old nursery, surrounded by creepy antique dolls and a rusted crib. She was curled up in a rocking chair, her hands protectively over her swollen belly. "Sarah," I breathed, relief washing over me. "What happened? How did you get here?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know. I woke up and I was just here. "John, what is this place? What's happening to us?" Before I could answer, a cold wind swept through the room. The dolls' heads turned, their glassy eyes fixing on us. And then we heard it, that voice again, no longer a whisper but a bone-chilling shriek. "This is our home." We ran, hand in hand. We fled through the twisting, impossible space of that hidden room. Behind us, we could hear things moving, pursuing. The air was filled with whispers and screams, the sound of 100 years of trapped souls. Somehow, we made it back to the door. We burst through it and I slammed it shut, leaning against it as if my weight alone could keep the horrors at bay. We didn't stay another night in that house. We packed what we could and left, abandoning most of our possessions and any hope of recovering our down payment. Some things are more important than money. We later learned the history of the house, the tragic deaths, the disappearances, the string of owners who fled in the night. We were lucky, the local historian told us. Lucky to have escaped. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps, still feel the cold touch of that locket in my pocket. And I wonder about the souls trapped in that hidden room, and I pray that they stay there, locked away in that house where reality bends and nightmares come to life. Because I know the truth now. Some houses are never truly empty, and some doors, once opened, can never really be closed again. The moment I stepped onto the porch of that isolated farmhouse, I knew something was terribly wrong. The door hung askew on its hinges, and an eerie silence blanketed the property. As a social worker, I'd seen my share of troubled homes, but nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that awaited inside. My name is Claire, and I've been a social worker for nearly a decade. I thought I'd seen it all. Homes ravaged by poverty, families torn apart by addiction, children bearing scars both visible and hidden. But the Lawson case, that was different. That was the case that almost broke me. It started like any other day. I'd received a report about the Lawson family, concerns about neglect, possible domestic violence. Standard procedure was to do a home visit, assess the situation, and determine if further intervention was necessary. The file noted that the family lived in a remote area, but I hadn't realized just how isolated until I found myself driving down a narrow dirt road, fields of dying corn stretching endlessly on either side. The farmhouse appeared suddenly, looming against the gray sky like something out of a Gothic novel. Paint peeled from its weathered boards, and several windows were boarded up. As I parked my car, I noticed there were no other vehicles in sight. Strange, considering the file mentioned 2 parents and 3 children. I gathered my bag and clipboard, took a deep breath, and approached the front door. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was amiss. The door wasn't just unlocked, it was partially open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Smears of what looked disturbingly like blood stained the white paint. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the oppressive silence. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, this is Claire from Social Services. I'm here for our scheduled visit." No response, not even the sound of movement from within the house. Just that unnerving silence. Every instinct told me to turn back, to call the police and let them handle whatever was going on here. But I couldn't shake the thought of those 3 children mentioned in the file. What if they were in there, hurt or scared? I had a duty to make sure they were safe. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior was dark, the air thick with the musty smell of neglect and something else, something coppery and sickening that made my stomach turn. "Hello?" I called again, fumbling for the light switch. It clicked, but nothing happened. The power was out. I pulled out my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. What I saw made my blood run cold. The living room was a scene of chaos, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. And there, on the faded floral wallpaper, were more of those dark, rust-colored smears. My heart pounding, I moved deeper into the house. The kitchen was equally disturbed, drawers pulled out and their contents scattered across the linoleum. A half-eaten meal sat on the table, covered in a fine layer of mold. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been recent. As I turned to check the rest of the house, something caught my eye. A child's drawing was pinned to the refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a smiling sun. The crayon sketch showed a house, this house, with 5 stick figures standing in front. But 3 of the figures had been violently scribbled out with black crayon, leaving only 2 standing. A chill ran down my spine. What had happened to this family? I made my way upstairs, each step creaking ominously under my weight. The upper floor was a long hallway with several doors leading off it. The first room I checked appeared to be the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, clothes strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry, but it was the message scrawled on the mirror in what looked horribly like lipstick that made my breath catch. "They're coming for us." The next room was clearly a child's, pink wallpaper, stuffed animals piled on the bed. But here, too, signs of violence marred the innocent space. Deep gouges scored the walls, and a family photo on the nightstand had been smashed, glass shards glittering in the beam of my flashlight. As I backed out of the room, a sound from downstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen floor. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't alone in the house. I tried to calm my breathing, to think rationally. It could be one of the Lawsons, returned home to find a stranger in their house. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Whatever was down there, it wasn't the family I'd come to check on. I crept towards the stairs, straining my ears for any further sound. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A low, guttural sound, almost like an animal growling. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down into the darkness below. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, a shape moved in the shadows at the bottom of the staircase. A figure, hunched and misshapen, its movements jerky and unnatural. Terror seized me. This was no person, no animal I'd ever seen. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, I'm not sure. But suddenly, the thing's head snapped up, and I found myself staring into eyes that glowed an unnatural, sickly yellow in the darkness. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, down the hallway towards what I prayed was another staircase, another way out. Behind me, I could hear it coming, its movements faster now, accompanied by a high-pitched keening that made my skin crawl. I found the back stairs and practically flew down them, my feet barely touching the steps. I burst out the back door into the fading daylight, not daring to look back as I sprinted towards my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror, something emerging from the house, its form seeming to shift and change as it moved. I peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind me as I accelerated down the dirt road. I didn't slow down until I hit the main highway, my heart still pounding in my chest. When I finally felt safe enough to pull over, I called the police with trembling hands. I told them about the signs of struggle, the disturbing messages, the feeling that something terrible had happened in that house. But I couldn't bring myself to mention what I'd seen inside. Who would believe me? The police investigation turned up nothing. No bodies, no evidence of foul play. The Lawson family had simply vanished, leaving behind a house full of unanswered questions. The case went cold, filed away as just another mysterious disappearance. But I knew the truth. I knew that something inhuman had been in that house, something that had likely been responsible for whatever fate had befallen the Lawsons. And sometimes, late at night, I still see those glowing yellow eyes in my dreams, still hear that unearthly keening sound. I left social work soon after. I couldn't face the possibility of walking into another house like that, of encountering whatever nightmare had taken up residence in that isolated farmhouse. Some days, I can almost convince myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, or hear a sound that's not quite natural, and I'll remember that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the dark corners of isolated homes, waiting for unsuspecting visitors. And I'll say a silent prayer for the Lawson family, hoping that whatever fate befell them was quick, because the alternative, that they might still be out there somewhere, in the clutches of that unnatural thing, is too horrifying to contemplate. So I keep my doors locked, my lights on, and I never, ever venture into isolated farmhouses anymore. Because once you've seen behind the veil, once you've glimpsed the horrors that lurk just out of sight, you can never truly feel safe again. The first splash of red caught my eye, a stark contrast against the dull green of the forest floor. The second made my heart race, a sinking feeling in my gut. By the third, I knew we had stumbled upon something we were never meant to see, and the distant sound of engines told me we weren't alone anymore. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend camping trip, just me and my 3 best friends, Mike, Sarah, and Tom. We'd been planning it for months, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. The spot we'd chosen was deep in the national forest, far off the beaten path. No cell signal, no worries, Mike had said with a grin as we set off down the narrow, winding trail. The hike-in was grueling, but the payoff seemed worth it. We found a beautiful clearing next to a babbling stream, the perfect spot to set up camp. As we pitched our tents and gathered firewood, the stress of our daily lives seemed to melt away. That night, we sat around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, the stars twinkling brightly overhead. It was early the next morning when things took a turn. Tom and I had volunteered to fetch more water from the stream while Mike and Sarah prepared breakfast. We were about a quarter mile from camp when I saw it, a splash of red on a fallen log. "Hey, Tom," I called out, pointing. "What do you think that is?" He squinted, then shrugged. I'm probably just some berries or something. Come on, let's fill these jugs and get back. I'm starving. But as we moved closer to the stream, we saw more splashes of red. Too many to be berries. Too dark. My stomach churned as I realized what it probably was. Tom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think that's blood. His eyes widened, and I saw the same fear I felt reflected in them. Maybe an animal got hurt, he suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We should have turned back then. Should have grabbed Mike and Sarah and hightailed it out of there. But curiosity, that damned human trait, got the better of us. We moved forward, following the trail of blood. The scene we stumbled upon will haunt me for the rest of my days. In a small clearing, partially hidden by dense underbrush, lay a body, or what was left of one. It was a man, or had been. His chest was a mangled mess, his face frozen in a rictus of terror. But it was the symbol carved into his forehead that made my blood run cold. A crude pentagram, still oozing blood. Tom retched beside me, and I wasn't far behind. This was no animal attack. This was something much, much worse. We need to get out of here, I managed to gasp between dry heaves. We need to call the police. Tom nodded frantically, his face pale. We turned to run back to camp, but froze as we heard a sound that didn't belong in these woods. The distant rumble of engines. Oh, God, Tom whispered. What if they're coming back? The smart thing would have been to hide, to wait until whoever it was had passed. But panic had taken hold, and all we could think about was getting back to Mike and Sarah, getting as far away from this nightmare as possible. We ran, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The sound of engines grew louder, and now we could hear voices too, gruff, angry voices that sent chills down my spine. We burst into our campsite, startling Mike and Sarah, who were sitting by the remains of last night's fire. Pack up, I gasped. We need to leave, now. What? Why? What's going on? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. No time to explain, Tom cut in, already starting to dismantle his tent. There are people coming, bad people. We need to go. To their credit, Mike and Sarah didn't argue. They must have seen the terror in our eyes, heard the urgency in our voices. We packed in record time, leaving behind anything non-essential. Just as we were about to head out, the voices became clearer. They were close. Too close. Split up, Mike whispered. Sarah, you go with Tom. Head east. I'll go with Alex. We'll head west. Meet back at the car if you can. If not, just keep going until you find help. We nodded, the gravity of the situation hitting us all. This wasn't a movie or a game. This was real, and our lives were in danger. Sarah and Tom disappeared into the trees, heading east. Mike and I waited a beat, then plunged into the underbrush in the opposite direction. We hadn't gone more than a few yards when we heard shouts from behind us. Hey, there's a campsite here. They can't be far. We ran. Branches tore at our clothes. Rocks and roots bruised our feet through our hiking boots, but we didn't slow down. The voices behind us grew fainter, but we could still hear them crashing through the woods, hunting us. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we paused, gasping for breath. The forest was quiet now, save for our ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. Do you think we lost them? I whispered. Mike shook his head. I don't know, but we can't stay here. We need to keep moving. We pressed on, trying to be quieter now, constantly looking over our shoulders. The sun climbed higher in the sky, filtering through the canopy above. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now, it felt oppressive, the heat and humidity sapping our strength. We were just starting to hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd gotten away when we heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified. Sarah's scream. Mike's face went pale. No, he breathed. Oh God, no. We stood there, frozen in indecision. Every instinct screamed at us to run towards the sound, to help our friends. But we knew that would be suicide. Whatever had happened to Sarah and Tom, the same fate awaited us if we went back. With heavy hearts, we pushed on. The scream had come from behind us, which meant we were still heading in the right direction. If we could just reach the car. But it seemed the universe had other plans. As we crested a small hill, we found ourselves face to face with two men. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks, and they were armed. Well, one of them said, his voice muffled by the mask. Looks like we found the stragglers. We turned to run, but more figures emerged from the trees behind us. We were surrounded. What followed was a blur of terror and pain. They marched us back to their camp, a collection of RVs and tents hidden in a large clearing. Others were there, all masked, all armed, and in the center of it all was an altar, dark with dried blood. They tied us up and threw us in one of the RVs. Through the window, I could see them preparing for some kind of ritual. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. As darkness fell, they lit torches, the flickering light making their masked faces even more terrifying. I don't know how long we were in there. Hours, maybe. We didn't speak, couldn't speak. The horror of our situation was too overwhelming. What had happened to Sarah and Tom? Were they already dead? Were we next? Just when I thought all hope was lost, we heard it. Sirens. Lots of them, getting closer. The camp erupted into chaos, people running, shouting, engines starting up. In the confusion, someone must have forgotten about us. The door to the RV burst open, and there stood a police officer, his gun drawn. "Are you okay?" he asked, quickly moving to untie us. "Can you walk?" We nodded, too shocked to speak. He led us out of the camp, past other officers who were rounding up some of the cultists. An ambulance was waiting, and paramedics swarmed around us, checking for injuries. It wasn't until much later, after hours of questioning and medical exams, that we learned the full story. A hiker had stumbled upon the cult's previous campsite, found evidence of their rituals, and alerted the authorities. They'd been tracking the group for days, and our lucky encounter with their search party had led them right to the cultists' new location. Sarah and Tom were found alive, thankfully, beaten and traumatized, but alive. The body we'd found, that hadn't been their first victim. And if the police hadn't arrived when they did, it wouldn't have been their last. Years have passed since that day, but the memories still haunt me. I don't go camping anymore. Can't stand to be in the woods, because now I know that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones with claws and fangs. Sometimes they're the ones who look just like us, hiding behind masks, waiting in the shadows to prey on the unsuspecting. And in the dark of night, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my window, I still hear those engines, those angry voices. I still feel the terror of being hunted. And I wonder, with a shudder, what might have happened if those sirens hadn't come when they did. The moment they walked in, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift. Their eyes were too sharp, their smiles too wide, and the way they looked at me, it was like a predator sizing up its prey. Little did I know, my quiet night at the 24-hour diner was about to turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. My name's Alice, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Mel's Diner for about 6 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and suits my night owl tendencies. Most nights are pretty quiet, a few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe some college kids grabbing a late-night snack. Nothing I can't handle. That night started like any other. I'd just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, plastering on my best customer service smile, but it froze on my face when I saw them. There were 5 of them, all men, dressed in dark clothes that seemed a bit too nice for our little diner. They swaggered in like they owned the place, talking and laughing loudly. The few other customers, an elderly couple and a lone trucker, glanced up nervously before quickly looking away. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll be right with you." They chose a booth in the corner, sprawling out across the seats. As I approached with menus, I could feel their eyes on me, assessing, calculating. It made my skin crawl. "What can I get for you?" I asked, pen poised over my notepad. The one closest to me, a man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned up at me. His teeth were too white, too sharp. "Coffee, sweetheart, lots of it, and keep it coming." I nodded and turned to leave, but he caught my wrist. His grip was like iron, his skin cold against mine. "And don't go anywhere," he added, his voice low. "We might need some extra service." I pulled my hand away, my heart pounding. As I walked back to the counter, I could hear them laughing, the sound grating against my nerves. For the next hour, I kept them supplied with coffee, deflecting their increasingly crude comments and wandering hands. The other customers left quickly, casting sympathetic glances my way as they hurried out the door. Soon, it was just me and them. I was refilling their cups for what felt like the 100th time when things took a turn. The man with the scar grabbed my arm again, pulling me close. "You know," he said, his breath hot against my ear, "we're not really here for the coffee." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me," I said, my voice shakier than I'd have liked. He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Or what? You'll call for help." He gestured around the empty diner. "There's no one here but us, sweetheart." That's when I saw it, the glint of metal tucked into his waistband. A gun. My blood ran cold as I realized just how much trouble I was in. "Now," he continued, standing up slowly, "why don't you be a good girl and open that cash register for us?" I backed away, my mind racing. The phone was on the other side of the counter, if I could just reach it, but they were too fast. Two of them vaulted over the counter, cutting off my escape. The others spread out, blocking the exits. I was trapped. "Come on, Alice," the scarred man said, reading my name tag. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Open the register, give us the money, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this." I knew he was lying. The look in his eyes told me they had no intention of letting me go. Whatever happened here tonight, they couldn't leave any witnesses. My hands shaking, I moved towards the register. My mind was whirling, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. As I punched in the code to open the drawer, I remembered something. The silent alarm button hidden under the counter. If I could just reach it without them noticing. I opened the register, making a show of gathering the bills. "Here," I said, holding out the money. "Take it. It's all we have." The scarred man snatched the cash from my hand, quickly counting it. His face darkened. "This is it. This is all you've got." I nodded, trying to look scared and helpless. It wasn't hard. "Business has been slow. Please, that's everything in the register." He exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication passing between them. Then, without warning, he lashed out, backhanding me across the face. I stumbled, tasting blood. "Don't lie to me," he snarled. "Where's the rest of it? Where's the safe?" I touched my stinging cheek, tears welling in my eyes. "There is no safe," I said. "I swear, that's all we have." He grabbed me by the hair, yanking my head back. "Wrong answer, sweetheart. Boys, tear this place apart. Find that safe." The others started ransacking the diner, upending tables and smashing dishes. I watched in horror as they destroyed the place, knowing that each passing minute decreased my chances of making it out of here alive. The scarred man dragged me into the kitchen, throwing me against the industrial refrigerator. "Last chance," he growled. "Tell me where the safe is, or things are going to get real unpleasant for you." I saw the knife in his hand then, the blade catching the fluorescent light. Terror coursed through me, but with it came a surge of adrenaline. I knew I had to act now or I'd never get another chance. I pretended to slump in defeat. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, I'll show you." He grinned, victorious. "That's more like it. Where is it?" Under the counter," I said. "There's a hidden panel." He dragged me back out to the main area. "Show me," he ordered. I moved behind the counter, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he must be able to hear it. This was it, my one chance. As I knelt down, pretending to reach for a non-existent panel, my hand found the silent alarm button. I pressed it, praying it still worked, praying help would come in time. "There's nothing here," the man shouted, realizing he'd been tricked. He grabbed me, spinning me around to face him. The knife was at my throat now, the cold metal pressing against my skin. "You lying bitch!" I closed my eyes, certain these were my last moments. But then, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't dared to make, I heard it, sirens in the distance, growing louder. The man's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "You!" he hissed. "You did this!" What happened next was a blur of violence and fear. The men panicked, running for the exits. The scarred man made a move as if to drag me with him, but his companions called for him to leave me. In his moment of hesitation, I managed to break free, scrambling over the counter and running for the kitchen. I huddled in the walk-in freezer, shivering not just from the cold but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear shouts, the sound of breaking glass, car engines roaring to life. Then, blessedly, the sound of police sirens, right outside the diner. When a police officer finally found me, I was half frozen and in shock. They wrapped me in a blanket and led me out to an ambulance, assuring me that I was safe now. In the days that followed, I learned the full story. The men were part of a gang that had been terrorizing small businesses across 3 states. They'd hit 2 other diners that same night before coming to Mel's. Thanks to my quick thinking with the silent alarm, the police had not only saved me but had managed to apprehend 3 of the 5 men. I'd like to say I went back to work, that I didn't let them win by scaring me away. But the truth is, I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at that diner, all I could see was the glint of a knife. All I could hear were those mocking laughs. I found a new job, working days at a bookstore, but I still have nightmares about that night. Still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling phantom hands grabbing at me, hearing that scarred man's voice in my ear. They caught the other 2 eventually. I had to testify at their trial, had to relive that night all over again, but seeing them led away in handcuffs, knowing they couldn't hurt anyone else, made it worth it. I'm stronger now in some ways, more cautious in others, and I never, ever work night shifts anymore. Because I know now that sometimes the monsters don't hide under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes they walk right through the front door, with smiles too wide and eyes too sharp, ready to turn an ordinary night into a waking nightmare.